What if one book could change how your child sees themselves and perhaps the world? On this episode of Let's Find Out, the Arapahoe Libraries podcast, we're speaking with award-winning children's author and educator, Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood. She's helping young readers see themselves on the pages of books and fall in love with reading along the way.
So I really think that starting with the child's interest is so important to begin to hook them into reading. But also, I'd say model reading. Show that it's valuable at home. So have your kids see you reading.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Hear from authors, experts, and opinion leaders to spark ideas, solve problems, and enrich your life. In Arapahoe Libraries, we turn every search for knowledge into a helpful adventure. Well, Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood, welcome to Let's Find Out.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Let's start with your story. When did you realize you wanted to be a storyteller, and what led you to write for children?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Mitch, as a kid, I hated reading, which sounds crazy from someone who now says that I have 28 books published and counting. But I did not like to read when I was a young kid. And I think often it's because I couldn't find myself in books. So instead of reading books, I was writing my own with myself and my family as characters. And that told me kind of early on, hey, I like this thing called storytelling. And I have this really fun story I like to share. My sixth grade teacher, she would always write predictions for all of her outgoing students. This is in sixth grade for me. And mine started like this: best-selling author JaNay Brown has done it again. So this told me that not only did I enjoy storytelling, but others saw that I kind of had a talent and a knack for it.
That's pretty cool. It's sixth grade.
Yeah, in sixth grade.
That's awesome. So you knew storytelling was something you enjoyed at a very young age, but not necessarily reading. So what advice would you give to parents or caregivers out there who want to support reading at home, especially if their child isn't naturally drawn to books?
You got to start with their interests. You got to figure out what is it that gets your kids excited. If it's nature, that's a great starting point. Look for books that, are taking place in nature or feature nature in some way. If it's superheroes, hey, you've got plenty of books that you can find that feature superheroes. So I really think that starting with the child's interest is so important to begin to hook them into reading. But also, I'd say model reading. Show that it's valuable at home. So have your kids see you reading and not just, our phones. I know myself, I can pull out my phone and be on it. No, I mean books and magazines and newspapers. Show them that you value reading too. And that also will help get them excited about it.
We know reading's important, but let's dive into this a little deeper. Why is early literacy so critical in a child's development beyond just learning how to read?
Well, have you ever heard of the importance of brain development from 0 to 5, right? So from birth to 5 years old, the brain is establishing these really important networks, but it requires stimulation. It requires experience for those networks to be built. So teaching children very early on by doing things like talking to them. Oral language is actually the foundation of early literacy skills. So having conversations with children, even infants. I remember telling families talk to your baby as if they are a part of the conversation. And this might blow their minds. Like, what? The baby can't talk back. That doesn't matter. Just by peering into the baby's eyes as you're talking to them, again, it's activating brain networks. It's starting to show the child what a conversation looks like when you're making eye contact and you say something and you wait for the response. Having the brain bathed in oral language starts to set that foundation for later skills that will lead to the ability to read, write, and spell, which is what literacy is.
You have a PhD in education, a background in child development. How does that shape the way you write for young readers?
So because of that, I think often my books have something that's called disguised learning. So in other words, I write a really strong story, but I'm incorporating lessons and practice within those stories. And when a kid is reading that story, they don't even realize that I just taught them some compare and contrast, or I just practice help them practice from 1 to 15. They're so engaged in the story that they're not even realizing that learning is happening. So that's something I'm able to do. I'm able to sort of weave in educational concepts, but into a story that captivates the listener. And I've seen it over and over again. For example, when I read my book, Shh, the baby's asleep, it's automatopoeia, right? It's sound words. And so here kids are, they're repeating after me, they're hearing these sound words and not even realizing that we're practicing with the sounds of language, which is called phonological awareness. Just by listening when I say creak, creak, they're paying attention to those things. And again, it sets the foundation for literacy.
Your books feature characters and stories that reflect all kinds of cultures and different voices. I'm thinking of the books about Harriet, Tubman, Simone, Biles. You brought those people to life for young readers. Why is representation like that so essential, especially in picture books?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I shared about not seeing myself in books and hating reading. One of the things that books can be are mirrors to our experience. In other words, we pick up a book, we read about a character that reminds us of ourselves, and then we see this character go on this journey, fail, 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 and then overcome and succeed. And from that, we can say, hey, if that character can do that, I can too. So I think seeing our experiences in stories that are then reflected back to us validate our experiences and tell us that our experiences are important. And I mean, who doesn't like to read stories that remind them of themselves, especially young kids, right? So I think that's part of why it's so important. The validation, the being able to see ourselves, but then also telling us our stories, our experiences matter. Because look, there they are on the pages of books.
You have a lot of great titles. I'm thinking of a couple of them I'd like to talk about. Imani's Moon, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Imani's Moon.
Imani's Moon, and also Why Not You? What inspired those stories? What do you hope readers take away from that?
Yeah, Imani's Moon is a story about perseverance. I wrote it like an African folktale. So it's like magical realism, but it's a little girl who sets this impossible task. She fails and fails and fails, and finally she succeeds. And all along the way, her mother is telling her these stories that help encourage her and inspire her. And it actually parallels my own entry into publishing. You know, it took 8 years from idea of Imani's Moon to actually holding the published book in my hand. And all the while it was filled with rejection and no, and people saying, maybe you should just self-publish. But I believed in that story and I kept at it. And not only did it get published, it was an award winner. It's been featured on like Stephen Colbert's show and Metropolitan Museum of Art Storytimes. And it's been published for more than 10 years and is doing really, really well. So it's a story of perseverance. And the name Imani, it's actually a Swahili word for faith, which is the message of the story. Believe in yourself and you can achieve. So that's where that one came up. And Why Not You was actually a book that I wrote in collaboration with Ciara, Grammy-winning artist Ciara, and her husband, Russell Wilson, the football star, right? Yeah. And they have a foundation called the Why Not You Foundation. And so we kind of came together and wanted to write the story that really captured the foundation and the things that they do in the community and really build off of Russell's dad's idea of why not you? Why can't you achieve? Why, you can. And so that's very much what inspired that story.
Another example of perseverance, right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And Mitch, that's something that I don't shy away from when talking to kids. I tell them there's going to be challenges. There are going to be things that are hard to do in lots of facets of your life, but you can't let that stop you. You use those things as learning opportunities, and you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep learning. And I think they need to know that. I think they need to hear that, life isn't just going to be easy and you just achieve your dreams and that's it. No, it takes a lot of hard work and perseverance and believing in yourself and picking yourself back up each time you're knocked down.
Great advice. This may be a hard question, but do you have a favorite character or book that's especially close to your heart?
That I've written or just in general?
Both.
Well, that I've written, Mitch, that's like asking me which of my kids are my
Right.
favorite.
That's
Luckily,
why
I
I
only
said it
have
was
one
gonna be
daughter.
hard.
Luckily, I
Yeah.
only have one daughter, Vivian, so clearly she's my favorite. But if I were to pick one book, it's probably Imani's Moon, just because it was the first, just
Yeah.
because it was filled with all that rejection, like I said. And, just because I just feel like it's an uplifting story that I want children to hear and to internalize and to take into their own hearts as they set their own goals and strive to achieve them. So I think for the ones that I've written, it's Imani's Moon. And as far as one of my favorite books, I always go back to Grace Lin. She has a book called Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. And just her voice and her storytelling and her characters and this adventure is one that I come back to over and over again. And I read that book to my daughter when she was younger, but then last year in school, she got to study it. And so now both of us have this love for the work of Grace Lin because she's a master at storytelling.
You have a whole different variety of books that you put, biographies, series books. Do you approach the writing in a different way for those different formats? How do you go about that?
It depends. It depends on lots of different things, like inspiration, for example. Some of my books, they're just something in my life or an experience I have inspires the story, and I just start writing. Other things might have an idea, but I have to actually like unpack it a little or do some additional research and then use that to infuse it into the story. So there's a variety of ways. Like sometimes I might just sit down and start writing. And other times I might actually plot it out. So my Love Puppies series that I published with Scholastic, I outline those. I'm like, okay, this is going to happen in this chapter, and this is going to happen in this chapter. But a book like Jam 2, which was a picture book that I wrote, the idea jumped into my mind, and I just like wrote, and it almost wrote itself pretty much. So there's like a variety to my process.
Makes sense. What would you say to young writers who maybe they've dreamed of writing stories for kids, but they don't know where in the world to begin?
I would say, one, keep a notebook with you. Just keep a notebook and have an open heart. In other words, pay attention to the things around you and something that captures your eye, like write it down. What was it? Was it that leaf, the way it fell from the tree? And you want to draw the leaf, or you want to write leaf falling from the tree? Be open to experiences and then write them down. And then once you write them down, start to see what else emerges from that. That's one piece of advice I would give. And the other piece is read. Go out and read books, because I found that, and it's not just that I found it, everyone knows that to be a really good writer, you got to be a reader. And I know it took me quite some time to get to the point where I enjoyed reading, but I'm glad that I do now. So I would say reading, and then having a notebook to capture those ideas is a good starting point.
You can tell when you look at all your work that you believe that storytelling can really help shape a better future for children. Well, why is that, do you think?
Well, one, I know, like, children are our future and they're going to save us. Like, that's how I feel about children and their creativity and their zest for life and their critical thinking skills are going to help us adults in the future in massive, important ways. And so I think that the messages that we put in the stories that we write now, that's going to impact the way they see the world. I'm going to give you a great example. Diversity, right? It turns out that there is a lack of diversity in children's books. It's gotten way better. It's a slow improvement. But if, say, children have these books that have all these diverse experiences in them, and they get to see themselves, but then also get to learn about other people's lives and experiences, this builds perspective. So then when they look at the world, for example, having a superhero that is Black, or a child who has two moms or two dads, that becomes the norm for them. And this speaks to how then they are that much more likely to just embrace that diversity. So if they're seeing that in books, that tells me that later on in their lives, not only are they going to, embrace it, but they're going to encourage it. They're going to know that that is the norm, that everyone's story is important and worth being shared. And I just think that that will lead to a more compassionate future because of that, and a future where everyone feels like they belong and are worthy. And so I know that's like a lot of responsibility for children, but I believe that. And I think, again, the stories that they're introduced early will impact the way they see the world.
Where can people find your books and connect with your work?
So my books can be found at bookstores like Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can find them at independent bookstores. Sometimes you might have to actually order them, but like my books, since they're traditionally published, you can really find them just about everywhere. And I have a website if you want to learn more about me. It's www.JaNayBrown-Wood.com. You can find my books and info about me there too.
What's one thing you hope every listener or viewer of this podcast does after this conversation? And I ask that because I know there are parents that think, boy, I wish I could figure out a way to get my kid to read more or enjoy reading more. So what would you share with them?
Build a routine around reading. Find ways to get kids excited. So in other words, like if you don't do bedtime stories, pick it up. And it doesn't matter if your child is an infant to a teenager. Read those books aloud. Read them interactively. Ask questions. Engage in conversations around it. So in other words, I'm saying build positive associations with books and reading so that when children think of books, they're going to go back to that time when they snuggled up on, mom's lap and they read the story, or they snuggled up on dad's lap and he made all those silly voices as he read those books. That really starts to kind of color the literacy experience in a really positive way. So read aloud and have fun while doing it.
Yeah, have some fun. I used to read in different voices from my kids, and when I got tired and I just tried to read it normally, they would say, "No, Dad, you're not doing it right." So they remember. They do remember, don't they?
I
Yeah.
know that. And I bet, I don't know if they have children themselves or if they plan to, I bet that they're going to do the same thing with their own kids. And here you set that precedent, right? So I think that's why I have fun with it.
Absolutely. All right, let's do some rapid fire questions here. All right. What was your favorite book you read as a child?
It was Maniac Magee, but I didn't read it. My teacher read it to us. So, and I was, I think, 5th or 6th grade. And just the way she engaged in reading it, I fell in love with that book. So Maniac Magee by, I believe it's Jerry Spinelli. That was my favorite as a kid.
Is there a picture book out there you wish you had written?
Yes, there is a book called Thank You, Omu, and it's written by Oge Mora, and she illustrated it as well. And it's just beautiful. It's one of my favorite picture books. So I wish I would have written that one.
When you're writing, what's your go-to snack?
Oh, my go-to snack when I'm writing is popcorn. Oh, I just love popcorn. I could eat popcorn all day long. So that is my go-to snack.
If you could step into any storybook world for a day, where would you go?
I would go to Hogwarts. I would step into Harry Potter's world, that magical world. I'd watch Quidditch and I'd go, Diagon Alley and all of those. That's where I would go.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you were hoping I would?
Yeah. To talk a little bit about what interactive reading includes. So
Okay.
I just said, like, read aloud to your children. And I said, like, use voices, but there are all these different things you can do with interactive reading that pulls your kid in. So you can ask them you can ask them questions related to the illustrations. You can ask them questions about the storyline. You can ask them questions about their own history. Like, hey, do you remember when we went to the farm? Yeah, what did we do? As you're reading something like Amara's Farm. You can change the tone of your voice so that it's lilting and it's going up and then it goes down, and you can have the kid repeat after you. There's just so much you can do. And research suggests that reading interactively has all of these benefits that really help children's brains develop and help develop language and literacy skills. So I love talking about that, especially because I created a free resource. It's called Jammies with JaNay. And I do some interactive reading in what's called a story start. So I start a story and then I turn it over to the parent and say, okay, now you finish. And so, and then I have these little resources like questions they can ask. And if there's a specific vocabulary word in that book that maybe their child might not know, I've got the word and the definition. So all they got to do is just pull out that story and read it. And I have these resources to help. So I think that's what I wish we could have talked about, but now we have. So check.
Now we
Perfect.
did it. Yeah. And we can find those resources on your website. Is that right?
Yeah, you can. On my
Perfect.
website, you can find Jammies with JaNay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I've had a blast.
Thanks for joining us for this inspiring conversation on children's literacy with the incredible Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood. From storytelling to representation, she reminded us how powerful books can be in shaping young minds and building lifelong readers. If you'd like to learn more about her work, explore her books, or bring her to your school or event, simply visit JaNayBrownWood.com. And don't forget, you can find great children's books anytime at Arapahoe Libraries. Until next time, keep reading and keep sharing stories that matter.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit us online at arapahoelibraries.org.